So hello, everyone, and welcome to CoachX Conversations, CoachX Live on LinkedIn with the Institute of Coaching. My name is Jeff Hull. I'm the Director of Global Development here at the Institute of Coaching, and I am really excited to welcome Amii Barnard Bahn with us today to discuss her new book and guide and assessment, the Promotability Index. So before we get started, let me encourage everyone to say hello in the chat box. We love to hear from people and see where you're coming from, whether it's your afternoon or your evening, from wherever you are around the world. We encourage you as we go along to put questions in the chat, and we will try to get to some of them if we can. And let me give you a little background on Amii. She's a dear friend of the Institute of Coaching, a fellow with us, recently participated in a really important research project investigating how leaders and coaches have worked through the issues that came up during the pandemic, which I guess is not really over, so still coming up. That will be published within the next couple of weeks. So she was part of the team for that, and we are very grateful to her for that. But let me give you a little bit of her background. She's a former Global 50 executive. She's an executive coach, obviously, a strategic advisor, a keynote speaker. She specializes in success for compliance and legal executives, legal executives in particular. She was named one of the top coaches in the world for legal and compliance executives. She's a member of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches with me. So we are colleagues in that esteemed group. And she's known for shaping culture, strategic initiatives, and working in the corporate world as a chief compliance officer at companies like McKesson and Allianz. But most importantly, she's recently put out a new book called the Promotability Index, an assessment tool and a guide that's really cutting edge in terms of what we need to be thinking about as leaders and as sort of the next generation of leaders is dealing with all the changes in the workplace. So I am really excited to have Amii here today. She joined us for a webinar last week at the Institute. And if you're interested in getting even more detail, please go to the Institute of Coaching's website where the video of our longer conversation is available. But today in particular, since we have an opportunity to interview Amii a little more personally, I'm going to dive into some of the issues that brought her to want to do the research and put together this amazingly helpful new book and guide. So with that, Amii, why don't we start with a little background, perhaps giving me some of the steps that brought you to wanting to do this kind of research, to put together this kind of guide, and maybe a summary of some of the key points. So before we dive into some other questions.
Sure. Well, gosh, as you mentioned, I spent about 20 years working in Fortune Global 50 organizations. I started as an attorney, as an employment attorney, so I was familiar with a lot of issues that managers and leaders and employees face in the workplace. And then went in-house to HR for about 11 years and worked my way up and was a CHRO, and then went back to law and started some compliance programs and got into ethics and some incentives and structures, and how do you prevent companies from misconduct and human behavior and rewards and incentive systems, which become important, I think, later for some of this. And then I became an advocate and did some diversity work for women on boards and other work as a fellow at the ACLU earlier in my career for people with disabilities. And I'd say that all of that brings together why I created this. I did not have a clear mentor growing up. My mom was a stay-at-home, wonderful mother and could not advise me on a corporate career or what to do. And I wanted to find an easy and insightful, and I hope inspirational way to deconstruct and reverse engineer promotions and climbing up the corporate ladder in any organization, or figuring out how to keep being a learning person, even if you don't want that promotion. I use promotability kind of broadly to mean someone that has a growth mindset, and that even if they're an individual contributor, they want to be the best at what they want to be and they want to keep growing. So that's really the background. I founded my consultancy once I left corporate, I decided that I wanted to continue to work in the 3 areas of workplace culture, leadership effectiveness, and corporate governance, because I work a lot with boards as well on preventing misconduct and setting things up properly around speaking up cultures. So all of that background is why I created the book.
That's so great to hear. I mean, your background in sort of ethics and the legal compliance and HR area gave you a lens really into all the different changes that have just accelerated recently in the workplace. And I'm really excited to have you with us today because I'm looking at the folks that are saying hi, and it's truly global. I mean, I just noticed that we have someone from Zimbabwe, someone from
Nice.
Brazil, someone from Ireland, someone from Hong Kong. So this is truly a global conversation, really, around how the workplace is evolving and what does it take to be successful in today's world. And I think what I love about the approach that you took in your promotability guide and your assessment is that you really boiled it down to some of the core elements that are becoming more and more crucial to success in today's world. I think we all know that the traditional sort of hierarchy and getting promoted based on seniority or based on your having some kind of specific expertise, that is all still accurate, but it's also not enough anymore.
No.
Organizations are flatter, roles are much broader, there's much more lateral movement. So the whole definition of success has evolved. So maybe you could share with the audience, because this may be new to a lot of folks, especially those joining us from around the world, some of the core principles that you recommend people think about, some of the key attributes that you focused in on in your promotability index.
Sure. So as you've pointed out, Jeff, with all of the changes, and I think the broken, if you will, employer-employee contract, which used to be, when you're really old school, that you'd work like my father for one company at General Foods for 30 years and you'd get a beautiful watch and you'd retire and you'd be set and you'd have a pension and that would be your career and your pseudo family. And that is not the way it works anymore, right?
Far from it.
Yeah, 50% of current kindergartners, their jobs haven't been invented yet, is a recent statistic that I learned. So there's immense possibility, as well as some jobs going away. We've all been talking about AI and how that's going to impact automation of jobs. And so really everyone needs to be a part of this conversation. And so for me, I would say that the Promotability Index aligns with my theory of radical self-reliance, which is you need to be responsible for your own learning. You need to be aware. You need to partner with your organization on where are they going, where are you, what are your goals and aspirations. Ideally, you have a manager that will have those conversations, but not always. It's very dependent on corporate culture. And sometimes you have to look externally for that support. But one of the healthiest things you can do for your career is focus on what you can control. Because some of us have to stay in jobs that we're not happy with. I've been there. Some of us, are in the perfect job and it's amazing. And we're just so excited about work every day. And then there's everything in between. And so, I think that achieving an exceptional career requires investing in yourself and planning ahead and trying to see around corners 3-5 years out. I'm happy now, but maybe 3 years, I wouldn't be happy doing this same thing. I need to stretch a little bit more. So what skills should I be gaining now to be thinking about where I want to be? Or maybe I want to be CEO. Maybe I want to serve on a corporate board. Those don't just happen right away. Usually you have to set yourself up for those. So I divided leadership and promotability into 5 areas that people can really identify and I hope feel really comfortable working on. And the book has 30 exercises dedicated to each one of them. And so those are the first key element of promotability that I found from all my experiences: self-awareness, then external awareness, strategic thinking, executive presence, and then thought leadership. And they are iterative and they overlap a bit, but they are in some degree in the order in which it's important as you become more senior in your career and as you want to continue to perhaps be more and more senior with responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's really great that you sort of sliced and diced what can be perhaps a long list of things or attributes that we're all supposed to develop over the career or over a lifetime, and sort of funneled it down to what I would consider to be the core principles or the core elements of success. And what's particularly valuable, I think, in the work that you're putting out is that it's not just about what you're going to need to climb a hierarchy. It's about what you're going to need to potentially be a leader in a fast-moving environment, or what you're going to need to have impact, even if you don't have a C-suite job, or maybe there isn't the likelihood of your being a CEO, right? But as you work on yourself, you're likely to develop practices, and a coach, in fact, would help you sort of move towards deepening all 5 of these areas, right?
And as we know from the conversation with IOC last week, it was wonderful to see all the coaches that are already using it with their clients. And it is more effective with either a coach or partnering with your boss on your self-assessment to validate your perception of how you're doing. That can lead to some really deep conversations. The other thing that has happened is organizations have adopted the PI as a part of their career planning process. I have a case study on my website regarding the results of that. And Jeff, I think you'll be pleased to hear that 100% of employees that participated felt heard. They felt engaged. They felt that their leader cared. And I couldn't have planned this, but what better time right now? I just wrote an article for CEO World around the great work quake and the resignation and how to try to prevent that from happening to you. And one way is to think about talent retention. And so structures and outbound support like this, and it's not the only one, there are other ways, but to show that your employees care and that you're having those deep conversations about, what is my development plan? Am I expendable? That's the scary question, right? At the bottom of a lot of of the fear and denial.
Or how to make myself indispensable. Right?
And there was a lovely Forbes article on my book that called it the SWOT analysis for your career. And the title is around how to avoid becoming expendable. And that gets to the point of, you might not want to be a CEO, who a lot of people don't. It's a really tough job. And some people don't even want to manage people, and that's fine. We need all types, right? We need really good individual contributors, and they can still continue to grow. I mean, my whole point is, I think that it's so exciting to think about different ways you can grow. And so the book gives tons of different ideas depending on what your interests are, and you can just choose. It's kind of a choose your own adventure, as one of my friends put it, because depending on your interests and your motivations and your preferences, there may be certain things that appeal to you, like public speaking, and others that don't. That may terrify you, and you may not be ready for that ever, and that's okay. You can write, or there's other ways to become involved and to show leadership. And so I tried to, and I've seen so many varieties of leadership. There's no one style, right, Jeff? And there's no one linear path to success. I, quit my job as a law firm attorney and took a huge pay cut and went into HR. One of the best things I ever did, but it was scary and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that it was going to lead me down this path. And so I think the book, I attempted to keep it creative and where you could pick it up in the middle or start at the end and work backwards, or however you like, because I think that's really how careers actually work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you and I, of course, are very aligned. My book recently came out also around leadership agility.
I have it right upstairs.
And
I should have had
it. No, that's great. But one of my key themes is the whole idea that the next generation of leaders, it's not about position. It's not about where you are in the hierarchy.
Yes.
It's about influence and impact. And you can do that at any point in your career.
Absolutely.
And the 5 promotability elements that you emphasize are absolutely key to success, no matter where you are in the organization. And so we're totally aligned in that the definition of leadership is evolving, that it's not really about getting a corner office at the top of the building anymore. It's really about developing yourself and having your periscope up so that you're seeing where you can have influence, where you can have impact, and where you can use your talents and your strengths, regardless of the role.
Yes.
So I think it's actually incredibly timely that this kind of work is coming out. So I am totally in alignment with it. I want to encourage folks, we have a few more minutes, and if you have a question for Amii, now is the time to pop it in the chat box. So I will scan and see if we're getting some specific questions. But one thing that I'd like to ask you, Amii, since you're putting out this work to large numbers of folks that are in a lot of different kinds of organizations, going through, a global pandemic and lots of disruption, what are you finding, would you say, trips people up the most when they want to be, when they're thinking about their future, they're thinking about what it takes to be successful? What is your biggest stumbling block that you notice?
I would say some people may have a hard time getting started. They may feel stuck. This has been a very difficult year for people.
Right.
And so if they don't have the right support system or intrinsic motivation to act, they might need to put together a support group, an accountability group, or partner either in their company or outside their company or with a coach to do that, to actually make progress. And you have to be motivated. So I would say for some people right now, motivation, it can be in general, I'm feeling that it's at more of a low than it was pre-pandemic. And that's because we've had childcare issues, we've had healthcare issues. Right. There's many good reasons for this. People have been through some very difficult times. But if you have the support, you can do that. I'd say the other challenge is people feeling out of the loop. And so to that, I would say, take it in your hands and schedule some time, give a heads up to your leadership and say, hey, I would really love to have a conversation short, just about kind of the next year or two. How am I doing now? We've all been through a lot of change. What are our goals? Am I on track to continue to get more responsibility? These are the things I really enjoy doing. This is the vision I have for my department. This is how it ties into the organizational goals. Now is a great time to do that. One of my biggest pieces of advice for people who want to literally have the promotion discussion is to completely separate it from the compensation discussion, which usually for most companies happens that are on a fiscal year, calendar year, like right. January through March, when bonuses are usually handed out in March, right? And those conversations are stressful for managers. Managers get, having been one, you get like a ballpark 3% raise to spread around, and it's stressful. And so you want to catch your manager and you want to create a psychologically safe space for your manager to be able to be super honest and direct and a partner with you so that it's a conversation. I'd say one mistake that I hear people make is they're angry or they feel overlooked. They feel like they've waited too long, or someone got promoted and they don't understand why. And the manager may not do a great job explaining that, which is a topic we could talk about too sometime. Right. My hope is that the PI gives leaders a language to explain that as well, because they should, as part of being a leader, you've got to be able to explain why someone got it and someone didn't, especially with bias and other things in the mix and very hot topics right now. So those are some of the mistakes that I see people make.
That's great. I'm gonna poke you a little bit on one of them, because I think it's really interesting to take a deeper dive around some of these. And I know you did this in the webinar, so I encourage folks to go back and watch the video. But this topic of executive presence is really interesting, I think, because it's not easily defined, and yet it often comes up, right?
It's a hot topic.
So it's a hot topic because it's something that trips people up, and yet it's also an area that's difficult sometimes for leaders, managers to be able to describe for their people. And I love the way you articulated it. Maybe you want to share a little bit about how you put it in the work.
Sure. I love the definition that CoQual created, because it broke it down into 3 tangible, weighted qualities. And it's presentation skills, which is 70%. They've done some experiments around what percent of each. So that's huge. So presentation skills is number 1 for executive presence. Number 2 is gravitas. And that's the ability to stay calm and cool under stress or challenge. And that's about 20%. And then only about 10% was professional appearance, Jeff, which may surprise some people. I have a feeling that it's more important as a first impression, like when you literally first see someone. Right. And I define it as, looking neat and tidy and personal hygiene and just dressing appropriately for whatever your workplace is. Could be a super conservative workplace, could be a really loose and artistic and be who you are, come as you are place, and everything in between. And so what I like about these three elements is everybody can get better at all three of them. They're within your control. You can learn to be more present and calm and less anxious. You can learn to be a better presenter, and you can make your own decisions about what you wear and what your culture's like and where you feel comfortable. And so I really like it because I think sometimes euphemism, I hope in the past, not anymore, has sometimes been used as a euphemism for, it's one of my least favorite phrases, similar to, you're just not ready yet. And you just need more executive presence. And people are like, what do I work on? What do you mean? Give me more information. And it's kind of lazy, to me as a leader to say that, like continue, give me some
Get
examples.
specific. Get very clear on, is it something related to being the way you present?
Yeah.
Or the way you articulate your ideas, or the timing? All the very specific information is incredibly valuable. So,
yeah, the goal for me is to create an objective criteria so that, because I'm involved with ethics, and for me, diversity is a part of ethics. It's a part of leveraging your talent and being smart about your strategy. And so, because there's nothing smart about leaving talent on the table. I don't know whose strategy sustainably can rely on that long term. Right. And so organizations should really be looking in as objective a way as possible who they're promoting and why, and what are the criteria, and they should be able to explain that to other people. And then for individuals, it gives them, I hope, a vocabulary for thinking and removing as much inherent bias as possible. There's always some subjectivity in any business decision, but let's try to get better at it, is my goal.
And inclusive when you're not sure whether you're being biased, to include others, right? Mm-hmm. To be bringing in feedback from various corners so that it's not just one person making some sort of subjective decision.
Yes.
I'm curious, before we let you go, to talk a little bit about your background and maybe your personal story. So what would you consider to be your biggest lessons as you climbed the so-called corporate ladder to become both a senior compliance officer, a CHRO? What were some of the big lessons that you learned along the way? Gosh,
I learned that networking is key, and having allies spread throughout the organization in order to lead change. I am one of my special skills is creating structures and programs that didn't exist previously. And I love the strategic element of that, and the cross-functional nature, and the change management, even though at the time I didn't really have that vocabulary when I was starting that out. And so I learned through those experiences how important relationships are, because we never do anything significant alone. And so it's critical to forge those relationships, even with people with whom you don't naturally get along. And so I'd say that was another thing that I did less well as a younger person.
You mean you didn't pop out perfect right out of college?
I made so many mistakes. We don't have time. But maybe we could do another show on.
I'd love to hear just one thing, but one area that you mentioned, which I think is really interesting, is that you were innovative, you were creative, you worked in HR, you worked in compliance, you worked in environments that were fairly structured.
Yeah.
So when you ran into a roadblock, so you come up with a great idea and you want to present it, you want to get buy-in. What was your strategy when people kind of looked at you like, nah, we're not going to do that, or that's out of bounds, or you're not ready for that? Whenever you sort of got the slow down, not yet, what was your strategy?
Yeah, I had that many times, whether it was building the compliance program for a $90 billion business at McKesson, or simply centralizing policies and creating a whistleblower helpline at Allianz. For the latter, I wound up needing to create a white paper, and I got creative around articulating the expense and the cost of not having an easy to use internal customer friendly website for employees where they knew to go where to find out what was expected and where they knew to go with questions and felt comfortable coming forward with concerns, which in a highly regulated industry, which is where I've usually worked, healthcare and finance. I've worked in a bunch of industries, but those particularly, it's quite important to have a speaking up culture because the regulatory environment is quite strict. And so I did a white paper and I literally went to HR colleagues in the headcount area and said, okay, what's the average salary for a non-exec? What's the average salary for an exec? And I figured, what's a reasonable amount of time that people spend on the internet searching around for the bereavement leave policy when they have a tragedy in their family, right? And then I wrote a white paper and said, okay, this is what it's costing us to not have an easy product for our internal customers, our most important customers, in my opinion, our employees. And it took about a year, and it was really frustrating for me because I personally felt the need because I felt like I was very in touch with both leaders and employees. And my boss gave me very good advice. And he just said, Amii, sometimes you've just got to be patient. And I wasn't patient. I like to execute. So, but it was good advice and he was right. And guess what? A year later, I got the green light, I got the staff, and it was terrific. For other things, I've had to take other approaches, like really sitting down with people. I love Lisa Leahy and Robert Kagan's article on, gosh, you're going to remember it, and I'm blanking right now, but it's around the idea of competing priorities. And that was life-changing for me. I love that book around immunity to change. Right. And their HBR article is fantastic. If you don't have time to read the book, it's brilliant. And it talks about how if you can, usually people don't oppose you because they think your idea is terrible. Usually if you really dig a layer deeper and you get your ego out of the way, there is some competing priority that they have that's very important to them. And if you can figure that out, you can create this incredible relationship with them around, have a, agendaless, purposeful conversation around simply listening, take that back, think, okay, what would I do if now I understand them better? How does that impact my project? How can I find alignment? Like, how can their goals and motivators and preferences align with the objectives of this project? And then how can I get them on board? How can I influence them? I would always pick my loudest detractors and put them right on my project team. So I think it's a Machiavelli theory, but I meant it to use it for good.
Keep your enemies close, right?
I'd rather have someone say, this is a stupid idea and this is why. You're forgetting X and Y. And half the time they were right. I'd be like, great, thank you, IT person. I would have never known that information. Or, thank you, salesperson, for telling me how that's screwing up your relationship with your customers if we do it that way. Let's figure it out together. It's so much better to have that kind of dialogue.
Right. Yeah. What I love about what you're describing is that it's core to relationship building and networking, as you describe in your book. And, instead of thinking about it, what you're trying to accomplish for yourself, what you're pointing to is you stepped back and thought about what is the potential motivation for getting someone to join me. Where's the benefit to them?
Exactly.
You even said it that you were already sort of customer centric, even though you were in HR. And I remember when I was in HR, that was part of the success of the role was to think of the folks that you worked for as potential customers and to put yourself in their shoes. And I think, we're reading and studying so much about the benefit of empathy these days, right? Empathy with our teams, empathy with our leaders, empathy.
It came up in the white paper significantly.
Yeah. And yet that's what it starts with, is you're as an individual to think about how does whatever I want to accomplish land, impact, and reflect on the goals of other people. So it's really wonderful advice. I hope everyone will take it to heart. I think it's a wonderful taste you're giving us of what you put in the Promotability Index, because as you said, you wrote a white paper. And that was probably, in fact, what you did at the beginning of the Promotability. I know I did for myself, as you write, right? Sort of a summary of what your passion is and what you're trying to share, and then you shape it. And at the end of the day, you have this amazing guide and this amazing assessment. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's wonderful that
you're welcome.
Had that experience. So before we say goodbye, tell us one more time how to find this book.
Sure. Just go to my website. It's barnardbahn.com, BARNARDBAHN.com. And I have lots of free leadership resources. You can find out about the book. You can see some of my videos and YouTubes on leadership shorts and other podcasts. And I think Jeff's and mine is up there too, which is terrific. And we also need to wish you a happy birthday. I won't sing on LinkedIn Live, but happy birthday, Jeff.
Thank you. It's fun to be able to do something enjoyable, even if it's so-called work, right? So I want to thank everyone for joining us from all around the world. These things always go by so quickly, but I do really encourage you to go to the instituteofcoaching.org, where there is a video of the longer webinar that we did with Amii, and she digs into the 5 principles from the Promotability Index. And I also want to encourage you to join me tomorrow, because we're having a wonderful webinar with Erica Dewan to dig into digital body language, which is obviously another topic that's very much aligned with everything that we're talking about. So join me tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for that. And then finally, I just want to remind anyone who's interested in the research underpinnings of effective leadership and effective coaching to please consider joining us for this year's conference, September 23rd, 24th, and 25th, virtual, sponsored by Harvard Medical School. It's going to be absolutely amazing. The speaker list is mind-boggling.
It's amazing.
And you'll find out more about that also on the website, instituteofcoaching.org. So with that, it's amazing how fast these things fly. Thank you, Amii, for taking the time out of your day to join us. And
thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. And I hope to see you again very soon.
Me too.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
See you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.